Well, Trump is also renewing his threat to take over Greenland. Tracking reaction to those comments is the CBC's Crystal Gumansing. She joins us now from London. So, Crystal, Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. And just in the last few minutes, we've had some breaking new details about how leaders there are responding to this.
Yeah, that's right. So we heard from the Prime Minister of Denmark, Mette Frederiksen, and she is talking about the fact of if President Donald Trump goes ahead and takes any kind of action against Greenland. She had said that any sort of action against another NATO country would cause everything to stop. So people are taking the threat, the suggestion that U.S. President Donald Trump wants Greenland seriously, especially given what we have just seen happen in Venezuela. Now, we also heard this past weekend from the Prime Minister of Greenland. He talked about the fact that Greenland and the United States have been friends for a long time.
All right, folks, welcome to Dr. John Podcast right now. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen delivered a cold, calculated warning that America's oldest and closest allies are prepared to go to war against the United States, not alongside it, as they have for 3/4 of a century. This shifts the entire foundation of American foreign policy, with consequences that will echo for generations. Denmark has formally warned that any American military incursion into Greenland would trigger NATO Article 5, meaning America's closest allies would treat U.S. aggression as an attack on all members and go to war against the United States. This is the most serious diplomatic crisis in the history of the Atlantic Alliance, where the alliance the U.S. built is now being used against it. The implications of this warning are staggering and completely unprecedented. NATO was created specifically to defend Western democracies against external threats.
Greenland has been taking security in the Arctic seriously, not only for themselves, but for all of their allies. And he again encouraged the President of the United States and all Americans to stop with the rhetoric, saying it is completely and utterly unacceptable. So let's hear from U.S. President Donald Trump. Now, he said that he would talk more about Greenland and its importance in the coming days, but this is what he told reporters on board Air Force One on Sunday.
I will say this about Greenland. We need Greenland from a national security situation. It's so strategic. Right now, Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security. And Denmark is not going to be able to do it, I can tell you.
Now, he also told reporters during that conversation that the only thing Denmark has done was added one more dog sled.
Primarily the Soviet Union during the Cold War and now Russia under Putin's leadership. The idea that NATO would need to invoke Article 5 against the United States, the founding member and largest contributor to the alliance, would have been absolutely unthinkable just weeks ago. But Trump's increasingly erratic threats against Greenland, his talk of taking it the easy way or the hard way, have forced our allies to make explicitly clear that they will not allow American military aggression against a fellow NATO member, regardless of how powerful the United States might be militarily. This is a sentence I never imagined I would have to say about an American president threatening one of our closest allies with military force over territorial acquisition.
For the protection of Greenland in that area. So he is making some disparaging comments and continuing this conversation, sort of having it resurface about the potential of seizing Greenland. And that is creating a lot of concern, frustration, and fear that he could actually act on this. And of course, we just don't know if it's Trump talking or if he is laying out future plans.
No doubt. Always a lot of unpredictability when it comes to the U.S. president. And when we watch what unfolded over the past several days, there has been so much international reaction to the military action and also the rhetoric coming from the U.S. president. What are you tracking on that?
Well, this is an interesting situation, Arthur, because, of course, especially in Europe, leaders are trying to manage things very carefully. They're still trying to make sure the U.S. is on side when it comes to Ukraine. There are still trade deals that are in the works, so there's concern there with, of course, fear over tariffs. But they have to say something, especially given the fact that Denmark is a NATO country. So we're hearing from a number of leaders.
The diplomatic damage from this moment is almost impossible to quantify. Every major European power has looked at Trump's behavior and concluded that they need to stand together against potential American aggression in a way that would have been unimaginable just months ago. Germany and the United Kingdom and France and Poland and Spain have all issued joint statements backing Denmark's position and making clear that they consider Danish sovereignty over Greenland to be a red line that cannot be crossed under any circumstances by any country, including the United States. These are not minor countries or peripheral NATO members making symbolic gestures for the cameras.
One of them is UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. This is what he had to say, and he's coming up very much on side of Denmark and Greenland.
Well, the future of Greenland is for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark, and for Greenland and the future of Denmark only. And Denmark is a very close ally of the UK, both in Europe and in NATO, and it's very important that we're clear about the principles applicable to here. Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark must determine the future of Greenland and nobody else.
And Dorothy, we're hearing similar comments also from leaders in Germany and in France, as well as the spokesperson for the European Commission.
Crystal, thank you for this. That's the CBC's Crystal Gomansing in London.
These are the major powers of Europe, countries that have been America's closest allies for generations through world wars and the Cold War and countless crises and challenges, standing united against an American president who has threatened military action against a treaty ally. The reversal of decades of alliance cooperation is breathtaking in its speed and its implications for everything America has built since World War II ended. Everything that generations of American diplomats and military leaders worked to construct is now at risk because of one president's ego and recklessness and refusal to listen to anyone who tried to warn him about the consequences. President Trump's obsession with Greenland has always been puzzling to foreign policy experts and casual observers alike. He has talked about the island's strategic importance, its resources, its location in the Arctic. But his approach has been so insulting and so heavy-handed that it has unified Greenlandic politics in complete opposition to any American deal now or in the foreseeable future. Every political party in Greenland, from left to right, across the entire political spectrum, has united in refusing American buyout offers and financial incentives. The Greenlandic people do not want to become American territory under any terms whatsoever. They do not want to be purchased like real estate by a foreign power who views them as a commodity to be acquired. They do not want to be threatened with military force by a president who seems to view their homeland as a piece of property, rather than a place where people live and have lived for generations upon generations, going back centuries. Trump has managed to take a population that was generally friendly toward the United States and turn them into people who want nothing to do with America whatsoever. This is the opposite of diplomacy. This is how you create enemies out of friends through sheer arrogance and incompetence. The connection to Trump's other foreign policy disasters is important for understanding the pattern of reckless behavior that has brought America to this dangerous point in our history. He invaded Venezuela without congressional authorization. He threatened Iran with military strikes. He threatened Cuba with regime change. He held secret meetings with oil executives to divide up Venezuelan resources after invasion, like some kind of colonial power from the 19th century. And now he threatened Greenland with military force despite it being sovereign territory of a NATO ally that we are treaty-bound to defend. Each of these actions taken alone would be a serious foreign policy crisis, requiring careful management and diplomatic skill to navigate. Together, they represent a complete collapse of American credibility and alliance relationships around the world. The military response from NATO has already begun. The alliance has started deploying military reinforcements to Thule Air Base in Greenland as a deterrent against any American military action that Trump might order. Let that sink in for a moment. NATO jets are being positioned to defend Danish territory from potential American attack. Military planners from multiple allied countries are reportedly developing contingency plans for defending Greenland against American invasion forces. Our allies are actively wargaming scenarios where they fight the United States military rather than alongside the United States military, as has been the norm for 3/4 of a century. This is happening right now. NATO actively planning to defend against the United States rather than alongside the United States, as has been the case for 75 years since the alliance was founded in the aftermath of World War II. The Pentagon's refusal to develop Greenland contingency plans has been completely validated by Denmark's response to Trump's threats. Military officers recognized that attacking a NATO ally would be illegal under international law and would trigger exactly this kind of alliance response from our partners around the world. They refused orders they considered unlawful, and the contempt findings from courts and the Supreme Court's refusal to grant relief confirmed that they were correct to refuse those orders. Now, Denmark's Article 5 warning provides the ultimate validation. The military officers who said this was illegal and dangerous were absolutely right in their assessment of the situation and the consequences. Their professional judgment was correct, and their refusal to follow unlawful orders was appropriate and necessary to protect America from catastrophe. The psychological impact on military morale and alliance cohesion is incalculable and will last for years regardless of how this immediate crisis is resolved. American service members stationed in Europe are now potentially facing the prospect of their allies preparing to fight them rather than fight alongside them, as has been the case for decades of cooperation and joint operations and shared training exercises. The trust that has been built over generations of working together, of training together, of bleeding together in conflicts around the world is being shattered by a president who seems to view alliances as obstacles rather than assets. The military professionals who have dedicated their lives to protecting American security are watching their life's work being destroyed by a president who has no understanding of what it takes to build and maintain international partnerships. Trump's threats to take Greenland the easy way or the hard way have backfired completely and spectacularly in ways that damage American interests far beyond this single issue. The easy way, purchasing Greenland or negotiating some kind of voluntary transfer of sovereignty, was never realistic, given that Greenland is not for sale, and Greenlanders do not want to become American territory under any circumstances or terms whatsoever. But Trump's explicit threats of a hard way, clearly implying military force against a NATO ally, have transformed this from a ridiculous proposal that could be politely declined into an existential threat that requires a military response from the alliance. By threatening force so openly and repeatedly, Trump gave Denmark absolutely no choice but to invoke the alliance commitments that protect them from exactly this kind of aggression from any power, including the United States of America. The strategic importance of Greenland has been well understood by American military planners for decades. The island sits at the crossroads of the Arctic, a region that is becoming increasingly important as climate change opens up new shipping lanes and access to natural resources. Thule Air Base has been a critical part of American early warning systems and missile defense since the Cold War. But the way to secure American interests in Greenland was always through cooperation and partnership, not through threats and coercion. Trump has managed to take a situation where American interests were largely aligned with Danish and Greenlandic interests and turn it into a confrontation that threatens the entire NATO alliance. This is foreign policy malpractice on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. The Danish Prime Minister's words were carefully chosen, crafted by diplomatic professionals who understood the gravity of what they were about to communicate to the world. Frederiksen didn't mince words or leave room for interpretation. She stated unequivocally that Greenland is Danish territory and that any military action against it would be treated as an attack on Denmark itself, triggering the mutual defense provisions of the NATO treaty automatically without any further discussion or negotiation required. She noted that Denmark has been a loyal NATO ally for 75 years and that they expect the same respect for their territorial integrity that they have always extended to other alliance members, including the United States, throughout that entire history of partnership and cooperation and shared sacrifice. The subtext was unmistakably clear to anyone paying attention. If America wants to act like Russia and invade sovereign territory of NATO members, then America will be treated the same way Russia would be treated by the alliance. The joint statement from Germany, the United Kingdom, France, Poland, and Spain demonstrates that this is not just Denmark overreacting or playing domestic politics for their voters at home. The major powers of Europe have reviewed Trump's threats carefully and concluded that they must stand united in warning America against any military action whatsoever against Danish territory. The German Chancellor's office issued a statement calling the situation deeply concerning and affirming Germany's commitment to defending all NATO territory, including Greenland, without exception or qualification. The British Foreign Office expressed full solidarity with Denmark and warned of severe consequences for any American aggression against a treaty ally. French officials warned that any American military action would have severe and lasting consequences for the transatlantic relationship that has existed for generations. Poland, which has been one of the most pro-American countries in Europe and has welcomed American military bases enthusiastically on their territory, joined in warning against any attack on Danish sovereignty. This is particularly significant because Poland has been a reliable American ally even when other European countries have been critical of American policies. The fact that even Poland is standing with Denmark against American threats shows how completely Trump has alienated our allies across the political spectrum. The diplomatic isolation of the United States under Trump's leadership is nearly complete, with even our most reliable partners now treating us as a potential adversary rather than a trusted ally and security partner. The military deployments to Thule Air Base are particularly significant because they transform this from a diplomatic dispute into an actual military standoff with real forces facing each other in the Arctic. NATO is sending aircraft and personnel to Greenland specifically to deter American military action and to demonstrate resolve and capability to defend the territory, if necessary, against any aggressor. These are not symbolic gestures designed for media consumption or domestic political audiences. These are combat-capable forces being positioned to defend against the United States military if necessary. The alliance is taking Trump's threats seriously enough to deploy actual military assets to prevent any potential American action against Danish territory. The strategic calculations behind these deployments are sobering. NATO military planners are reportedly developing detailed contingency plans for defending Greenland against American invasion forces. This means they are analyzing American military capabilities, developing defensive strategies, identifying vulnerabilities, and preparing to fight the most powerful military in the world if necessary. The fact that allies who have trained alongside American forces for decades are now planning to fight against them represents a complete inversion of everything the alliance was designed to accomplish. The trust and cooperation that took generations to build is being destroyed in a matter of months by a president who seems to view alliances as obstacles rather than assets. The connection to impeachment proceedings against Trump adds another layer of significance to this crisis. One of the impeachment articles charges Trump with destroying alliance relationships that protect American security interests globally. Denmark's Article 5, warning, the first time in history that NATO has warned it might invoke mutual defense against the United States, is the most dramatic possible evidence that Trump has done exactly what he is charged with doing in that article of impeachment. This is not speculation or political rhetoric. This is documented reality that senators will have to consider when they vote on whether to remove Trump from office. The Greenland crisis provides concrete proof that Trump has fundamentally damaged national security through his reckless conduct. The contempt findings from courts and the Supreme Court's refusal to grant relief to the administration add another dimension to this crisis. Military officers who refused orders they considered unlawful have been vindicated not just by American courts, but by the international community itself. NATO's response proves that attacking Greenland would indeed trigger exactly the alliance war that the generals warned about when they refused to develop those contingency plans. Their professional judgment was correct, and their refusal to follow unlawful orders was appropriate and necessary to protect America from catastrophe. The legal and military establishments have been proven right in their assessment of the situation and the consequences of Trump's actions. Trump's Greenland threats have triggered a NATO Article 5 warning from Denmark, potentially turning the alliance the U.S. built against itself, damaging trust and cooperation for years and possibly decades to come. The economic implications are also significant. Greenland's resources and shipping routes, once of interest to American investors, are now in a toxic political environment that makes investment unlikely. This diplomatic blunder, coming alongside multiple other foreign policy challenges, Ukraine, China, Iran, Middle East, diverts attention from more pressing threats and leaves America increasingly isolated from its traditional partners. Military professionals who refused to develop Greenland invasion plans have been validated by the courts, the international community, and the NATO alliance. Their insubordination was principled resistance to illegal orders that would have undermined American security for generations. The crisis is part of a coherent pattern in Trump's foreign policy. Venezuela, Iran, Cuba, Greenland, a worldview that sees international relations as zero-sum competition rather than cooperation, bullying allies and threatening multiple countries simultaneously with consequences that have now become real and imminent. The European response to Trump's threats has been remarkably unified across countries that often disagree on other issues. Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Poland, and Spain have set aside their differences to present a common front against American aggression. This unity is particularly remarkable given the challenges facing the European Union and the tensions between Western and Eastern European countries on other issues. Trump has managed to do what no other American president has ever done: unite Europe against the United States. The legacy of this diplomatic disaster will be felt for generations, as European leaders remember that their trust in American leadership was betrayed by a president who treated them as adversaries rather than allies. The strategic importance of the Arctic region is growing as climate change opens up new shipping lanes and access to natural resources. The United States has legitimate interests in the region that require careful diplomacy and cooperation with other Arctic nations, including Denmark and Greenland. Trump's approach has undermined those interests by creating confrontation where cooperation was possible. American companies that might have wanted to invest in Greenland's resources are now facing a hostile political environment. American military planners who need access to Arctic bases and intelligence are now dealing with allies who are questioning American trustworthiness. The damage to American interests in the Arctic will take years to repair. The international legal implications of Trump's threats are also significant. Under international law, territorial acquisition by force is illegal. The United States has been a signatory to treaties and agreements that prohibit such actions for decades. Trump's threats against Greenland would violate these treaty obligations and would subject the United States to international legal sanctions and diplomatic isolation. The fact that a sitting American president would openly threaten to violate international law in such a blatant manner is unprecedented in modern history. The damage to American credibility on international legal issues will be lasting and profound. The NATO Article 5 warning represents the ultimate failure of Trump's approach to alliance management. The alliance that has been the cornerstone of American security policy for 3/4 of a century is now being turned against the United States because of Trump's threats. This is not a theoretical possibility or a remote contingency. This is a formal declaration from our allies that they will treat any American military action against Greenland as an attack on Denmark itself, triggering the mutual defense provisions of the NATO treaty. The alliance that was designed to protect Western democracies from external threats is now preparing to defend itself against the United States. The economic consequences of this crisis extend far beyond the immediate situation. American businesses that rely on European markets and partnerships are facing increased uncertainty. European governments are reconsidering their economic relationships with the United States. The defense industry, which has benefited from NATO cooperation for decades, is now facing the prospect of European countries developing their own military capabilities independently of the United States. The long-term economic damage from the breakdown of the transatlantic alliance will be significant and will affect American workers and businesses in ways that will be felt for years to come. The humanitarian implications are also worth considering. The Greenlandic people are caught in the middle of a crisis they did not create and did not deserve. They have been threatened with military force by a foreign power, subjected to heavy-handed pressure and attempts to buy their homeland, and made the focus of international tensions that they have no ability to control. The people of Greenland have made their wishes clear. They do not want to become American territory under any circumstances. Their voices deserve to be heard and respected. Trump's approach has shown complete disregard for their self-determination and their right to decide their own future. The political situation in Europe has been transformed by Trump's behavior. European leaders who previously tried to maintain good relations with the United States are now reconsidering their approach. The fundamental assumption that America can be trusted as a security partner has been challenged. European countries are discussing the need to develop greater strategic autonomy, to reduce their dependence on American military protection, and to build their own defense capabilities. This process will take years, but it has been accelerated by Trump's threats against Greenland. The American-led alliance system that has maintained European security for generations is being dismantled by a president who does not understand its value. The domestic political implications for Trump are devastating. The Greenland crisis provides powerful ammunition for impeachment advocates who argue that Trump is unfit to serve as president. The damage to American alliances, the threats against NATO allies, the reckless behavior that has isolated the United States from its partners, all of this evidence supports the case that Trump has fundamentally failed in his constitutional duty to protect and defend the country. Senators who are considering whether to vote for removal now have concrete evidence of Trump's failures on the international stage that goes beyond partisan disagreement to demonstrate genuine incompetence and recklessness. The military opposition to Trump's Greenland plans has been validated by events in the most dramatic possible way. The officers who refused to develop invasion plans were not acting out of political opposition or personal animosity toward the president. They were acting out of professional judgment, recognizing that attacking a NATO ally would be illegal and would trigger exactly the kind of alliance response that has now occurred. Their legal analysis was correct, their strategic assessment was accurate, and their refusal to follow unlawful orders was appropriate and necessary to protect America from catastrophe. They are heroes who stood up to presidential pressure and protected the country from a disastrous mistake. The broader pattern of Trump's foreign policy approach is now clear to anyone paying attention. He views international relations as a zero-sum competition, where American power can be used to dominate and intimidate rather than to build cooperation and shared security. He threatens allies as readily as adversaries. He treats international law and treaty commitments as obstacles to be ignored rather than obligations to be respected. He has no understanding of the importance of alliances or the value of diplomatic relationships built over generations of cooperation. The result is a foreign policy that has isolated the United States from its partners, alienated our allies, and damaged American interests around the world. The Greenland crisis, with Denmark's NATO Article 5 warning, is the latest confirmation that Trump's presidency cannot survive much longer under mounting pressure from courts, Congress, allies, and institutions, domestic and international, that have aligned against him. The alliance system that is protected American security for generations has been severely damaged, and repairing it will take years regardless of what happens next. History will judge this moment harshly, and the only question now is how much more damage Trump can do before he is finally stopped by the institutions that are supposed to constrain presidential power.